Hi there! Welcome to our lesson on finding sides using trigonometry. So the objective of this lesson is to be able to use a trigonometric ratio to find the length of a side in a right triangle. So problems that look like this. Let's start off by reviewing our trigonometric ratios. Remember, this was our mnemonic device, SOHCAHTOA. So we are going to use this triangle to find sine, cosine, and tangent. The first thing we want to do is identify theta and label the sides with reference to theta. So here we have our opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse labeled. Now we are ready to go ahead and find our ratios. Sine is the SO, opposite over hypotenuse, or 9/41. Cosine is CA, adjacent over hypotenuse. In this triangle, 40/41. And then we have tangent, which is TOA, opposite over adjacent, 9/40. So that's our review, and that's going to get us started and lead into finding the lengths of a side. Here's our first example. Find the length of the indicated side. We want to start this off in the same way. We are going to label the sides opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse, and our theta, or the angle that we will be labeling this triangle in respect to, is the angle that is measured. So the 61 degrees would be our theta. So we'll go ahead and label those adjacent, opposite, and hypotenuse. Now, how does this really help us? We only need to worry about the sides that have information, so a variable, an expression, or just a length on them. In this case, we don't need hypotenuse, so we're going to ignore that because there's no information there. Now we go look at our SOHCAHTOA. The two sides that we have are opposite and adjacent. So that means we are going to use tangent because that's the opposite over adjacent. Set up your ratio. So tangent, opposite over adjacent. We're going to plug in the information including theta. So tangent 61 degrees equals 22/x. Again, just plugging in that information from our diagram. Now we are going to utilize our solving skills to get x by itself. So the first thing we want to do is get rid of x in that denominator by multiplying each side by x. And when we do this, we end up with x times tangent 61 equals 22. We've gotten rid of that denominator. Now x is on the left side, but we still need to get x by itself. We can divide by tangent 61. Think of tangent 61 as its own unit. Divide each side by tangent 61. And so x equals 22 divided by tangent 61 degrees. At this point, all we do is we go to our calculator and we type this in. 22 divided by tangent 61. And hit enter. And x equals 12.19. Now, let's talk about our calculators. Some of us may be having issues with our calculator for good reasons. There are two modes on the calculators. If you have a TI 84 or an 83, any calculator that looks similar to this, there's a button here towards the top left called Mode. If you press on that, you'll get this screen here in the center. You want to make sure that degree is the one that is highlighted, not radian. So just move your cursor down and over and hit enter on degrees so that black box appears around it. At this point, you can exit out by hitting second quit, which is also that mode button. To check to make sure you're in the right mode, go ahead, type in sine 30, and it should come up with 0.5 or 1/2. Now, I am going to put a disclaimer in here that the iPhone calculators do not work in this same manner. Their process goes in some backwards notation, so iPhones are not going to be an effective method when you're solving for sides or even when you're trying to do angles later. So just a warning, this is the point where we need to have our own calculators out so we know how to utilize them and how to switch that mode, because if you're not in degree mode, you're going to get some funky answers. All right, let's go back to some problems. Here's example 2. Start it off just like everything else. Label your sides, opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. Remember that 29 degrees is the theta that we're referencing. Now, adjacent in this case is the one that doesn't have any information. So we don't need that. And we have opposite and hypotenuse. In SOHCAHTOA, opposite and hypotenuse go with the S for sine. So let's set up that ratio. Sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. Plug in the values. Sine of 29 degrees equals x over 10. Solving for x, we need to get rid of that 10 on the right side. 10 is in the denominator, so multiply each side by 10. This will get rid of the denominator on the right and leave us with 10 times sine of 29. Now at this point, we just need to put it in our calculator because x is all by itself. There's nothing else we need to do with this problem. Go to your calculator and we're going to type in 10 times sine 29 and you should get 4.85 equals x. Okay, it's your turn to try. I'm not going to start this off for you. I want you to hit pause, go through, label the sides, set up your ratio, and solve for x. Go ahead, hit pause now. All right, let's see how you did. First step, label your sides. Here's my adjacent, hypotenuse, and opposite sides. We don't need adjacent, just the opposite and hypotenuse. In SOHCAHTOA, that relates to our sine ratio because that has the O and the H. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Plug in the values. Sine of 56 equals x over 18. Multiply each side by 18 to get rid of that denominator. 18 times sine 56 equals x. Now that x is all by itself, we're all done. We're ready to go to our calculator. Type in 18 times sine 56 and x equals 14.92. All right, so that one was just like example number 2. Okay, this problem's a little bit different. I want you guys to go through, try this out on your own. It's the same process. Label the sides, set up your trig ratio, and go through the steps to solve for x. Okay, hit pause now. All right, let's check our work. First step, label the sides. Opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. The opposite side doesn't have anything on it, so we don't need that one. Now we have the adjacent and hypotenuse. Adjacent and hypotenuse is next to the C, which would be cosine in SOHCAHTOA. So let's set up our ratio. Cosine theta equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Plug in the values. Cosine 47 equals 35 over x. And we're multiplying by x on each side, so we don't have that denominator. We end up with x times cosine 47 equals 35. But x still is not by itself. We are trying to solve for that. So divide each side by cosine 47. And we find x equals 35 divided by cosine 47. Now that x is by itself, we can go to our calculator and type that in. 35 divided by cosine 47. You should end up x equals 51.32. All right, so just before we wrap up, make sure that you are, 1, getting the work correct, and 2, getting the correct answers, because there's 2 parts to these problems. The work in solving for x versus being able to type things into your calculator. And that's going to help identify where and why you may be getting some answers incorrect. If you're not doing the work correctly, or if you're not plugging it into the calculator correctly. Because again, those are two very different things to take care of. So let's just wrap up some important things here. Remember to always set up your trig ratio. Use SOHCAHTOA. Also, focus on solving for the variable. This involves using your solving skills from algebra just like you've always done. And finally, make sure you know how your calculator functions. You need to be in degree mode. And that is all for this lesson.